Hi there, and welcome back to the CKM Red Rugby League channel. It has been a hot minute since I've been able to say that. We are back. It is going to be a season review. We're going to be taking a look at the Bulldogs 2021 season and going through all their results, all the ups and downs, new signings, ins and outs, and of course Trent Barrett's first season as a head coach in the NRL. Luke was with me until about a second ago, so it looks like you've just got me for the time being, and he's returned. It wouldn't be a CKM show without a few technical difficulties.
It really wouldn't. We're not coming to you from the Jobson Cave in Balmain. We are in a beautiful hotel down in Adelaide, ready to work the second Ashes test and to watch your Poms get absolutely thumped, mate. But of course, we're not here. We're not talking about cricket and the poorly Poms. We're talking about the poorly Dogs, really, aren't we?
Yeah, it was not the best of season for the Bulldogs. The way that we're going to work this is we're going to go through the rounds sort of 5 at a time in blocks of 5, going games 1 to 5 and then 6 to 10, so on and so forth. So I think we start with the off season. The Bulldogs recruited relatively well. It seemed pretty promising, but a lot of the focus for the Bulldogs was probably on 2022 with news of some of the signings that they were linked with, the likes of Josh Adokar, Tavita Pangai Jr., a few players, a few names that were bounced around at the time, and the Bulldogs probably a little guilty of looking to the future, but they'd recruited pretty well. Corey Allen coming in, Nick Cottridge, Kyle Flanagan, Jack Everington, and Corey Waddell all joining the Bulldogs for what was meant to be Trent Barrett's maiden season, and as an NRL coach, and one for the Bulldogs fans to look forward to and get excited about, but not the case. Before even a ball was kicked, off-season scandals, Jed Knockenbore and Corey Harawira-Nara found their contracts being revoked after an incident, and then, unfortunately, the Ockenball remaining with the Bulldogs after his contract termination was overturned. Harawira-Nara then heading to the Raiders, but we'll talk about that as we get further into the season. We get into games 1 to 5, and it was a bleak start, to say the least, for the Bulldogs. 34 points scored in the first 5 games, 174 conceded. 32-16 loss to the Knights, a 28-0 to the Panthers, 28-0 to the Broncos, 38-0 to the Rabbitohs, and a 52-18 loss to the Storm. Arguably their worst start to a season ever. Where do you even start with that?
A lot of the hype that the Dogs had received over the off-season was based on the aforementioned signing of Kyle Flanagan. Coming from the Roosters, short end of the stick. Yeah, a lot of pundits argued that he was the scapegoat for. It wasn't a bad season for the Roosters, but it wasn't great. But Bulldogs getting him, the aforementioned Nick Cottridge, a strike weapon on the wing, some good depth there, and Corey Waddell, Jack Etherington, a big bopper. They started well in the sense that they scored in the first 3 minutes, and it all went downhill from there. You could argue that 32-16 against the Knights, you could still see something coming out of it. Nick Meaney looked fine with Tenny Zalesniak with a double. Yeah, some flimsy defense. Yeah, but realistically, it was a 20-minute period in that game in which the Knights scored 4 tries to nothing. You take away that lapse, and it's a very competitive game. But then you lose 28-0 against the Panthers. You go to Brisbane, 24-0. Again, 38-0 against the Bunnies. And then a 52-18 thrashing against the Storm. It wasn't pretty. There was no cohesion. There were more halves pairings than... Geez, how do I keep this one PG? You just toss a coin. Heads or tails, Flanagan... Wakeham, Avarillo, Jeremy Marshall-King, Sione Katoa. Yeah, any of those 5 could have been in the halves. and it's a constant theme throughout the season as well. I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but there's just no consistency. Their forwards didn't stand up. I don't believe they had Luke Thompson for the first 3 or 4 rounds either. So, yeah, major player, big go forward, wasn't there. Hetherington, I think, was sin-binned and suspended. Adam Elliott didn't stand up. I mean, you kind of maybe at times saw a little something out of Nick Meaney, but I mean, it was pretty bleak viewing a start, and 52-18 against the Storm side, in which it's Luke Thompson, Jake Averillo, and Dallin scoring, but it was, what was it, 8, 9 different Storm players. No one scored a double. Tui Kamakamitha scored. That's when you know that you're struggling. When Kamakamitha and Christian Welsh are scoring in the same game, you know you're struggling defensively, and it just, it was pretty bleak viewing from the start.
Yeah, I mean, in the context of those opening 5 games, you've got the 2 grand finalists that they're put a 0 on them, and you've got last year's premiers as well. And in the context of the Storm being as good as they were this year, I mean, some of those results, although to Bulldogs fans, you'd feel are almost semi-justified in the context of that is the top 3 teams this season that have run those points up. But then you look to the Broncos result, and they finished 15th. They were the closest team to the Bulldogs, and they were in disarray for large parts of the year. I mean, as you mentioned there, spinal changes. For the first 4 games, they stuck with the Averillo Flanagan combination, with the exception of that 38-0 loss to the Rabbitohs, where it was Lewis and Flanagan that were the 6 and 7. Averillo missing out there, but I mean, it was a poor performance from the Bulldogs in those first 5 games, and Trent Barrett not getting off to the best of starts there, and it doesn't get much better round 6 to 10 either. The Bulldogs having to wait until round 7 to record their first win, which was an 18-12 win over the Sharks in wet conditions. It was so going through round 6 to 10, 38-18 loss to the Cowboys, who finished 14th eventually, an 18-12 win over the Sharks, a 32-10 loss to the Eels, a 32-12 loss to the Dragons, and a 20-18 loss to the Raiders. So about round 10, you're starting to see maybe a little bit of coming together, a little bit of cohesion, something to maybe give the Bulldogs a little bit of optimism. I mean, they've won their first game over a team that would eventually qualify for finals. You've got the 20-18 loss against the Raiders, a nice narrow loss there for Bulldogs fans to cling a little bit of hope to. It just didn't seem to happen for them. They were continually going round and round this cycle. I mean, the spinal changes look like a chiropractor's office. The back room constantly fighting battles. It was just really hard. I mean, Luke Thompson was putting in a shift, but even so, even in that win against the Sharks, Will Hopewadi was your top meter maker with 187 meters, which is not a great look when your fullback's having to come up with all your meters there. I mean, it was just very, very challenging seeing any way out for the Bulldogs based on how they were performing and how they were playing.
Yeah, look, it wasn't pretty, and look, we'll give credit where credit's due. To an extent, this was a Bulldog side that was pretty decimated through the spine with injury. I know Flanagan was out for a while there. Jeremy Marshall-King had one of the LaFranc fractures in his foot. So, yeah, they had to call up Brad Dietz, who was on a train and trial in the summer. And mind you, Bradley Dietz, for someone who was on a train and trial and making $80,000 a year and on minimum wage in rugby league, for the games he played, he looked superb. And that's hard to say in a Bulldogs outfit. As you mentioned, Luke Thompson, I mean, you kind of expected that from him. It was it was kind of about here. I'm like, okay, don't mind that. Like, this is where Thompson went from being a 13 to being a prop. Didn't mind that. And we saw Barrett kind of flip and flop that around, sometimes enforce, sometimes not. But it wasn't a bad option. Corey Waddell in their Bulldogs win, 125 meters, a whole bunch of tackles as Matty now goes MIA, but she'll be right. There was something there. There was definitely something there. Welcome back from Leeds in the UK. But again, you look at the teams that they played, round 6 to 10. The Cowboys, super dysfunctional at this point in the season. I don't know if they had won a game at this point. And, it didn't look great all year. But still, they got 30 points. Parramatta, you'd argue for a while there, for about 60 minutes, the Bulldogs were in the game. They just couldn't finish it off, and Para ran around them in the end. The Dragons, more cold than hot this year, but still just the Dogs weren't there, scored 2 consolation tries. The Raiders in Magic Round wasn't great. Harawira Naira scoring against his old side, that's something that was like, yep, okay, you Butte, let's go. But, this is a Raiders side that for a while they had 11 players on the field, and still the Dogs lost. Like, there was no cohesion. As you mentioned, they were chopping and changing. The pressure was already starting to get to Barrett, get to Flanagan. He's already been dropped once, I think, at this point. I think he played in the Raiders game because Avarillo was kicking at that point. But what you can almost take out of these 5 games is at least the Dogs had a little bit of heart. They played with a little bit of ticker. It's a better comparison seeing them going up against a Raiders side that was more hot and cold, a Dragons side that was more cold than hot, an Eels side that they always stand up for. And you kind of, again, you saw this emergence from Nick Meaney, who I believe is now going to the Storm in 2022. Jake Avarillo really started to stand up and try to carry that team on his back. There were positives that were coming out of this, but at this point, fans are also starting to question, is Kyle Flanagan really worth the money that we're spending on him? He's playing reserve grade. He's playing, if he's playing at all, of course, he had that ankle injury for a while. Nick Kotrich, was on $550,000 a year, obviously now is going back to the Raiders, not really delivering on a try-scoring front. Mateni Zelezniak, he's starting to look like he might be on his way out. The forwards doing what they can, but not having much of a platform. Very much more questions than answers. And it's at this point that I think Trent Barrett's like, right, we're done with this year. We do what we can, and we start looking at 2022.
Yeah. And there was signs of improvement in the next few rounds. The Titans taking out a 30-20 loss against the Bulldogs as they started to come into their own and grow into the season. Playing the Panthers again in round 12, a 30-4 loss. Round 13 was a bye. They recorded their second win of the season in round 14 in a 28-6 win over the Dragons. And then into round 15, 36-10 loss against the Eels. I mean, against the Dragons, they did look a much improved side. The Dragons at this point, they were yet more disarray. The Dragons were finding themselves falling down the table as they do in traditional fashion, start hot, finish cold. And they were starting to bow out of the mid-season race at that point, and the Bulldogs took full advantage of that in that 28-6 win. Again, that was a game that Kyle Flanagan was forced to sit out. He was named as the 18th man, despite being, I think he was actually set to play for that game before being dropped at late notice. round 13, obviously that bye round, doing the Bulldogs some good, giving them time to sit back and rest a little bit as we head into June there. But a 30-4 loss to the Panthers, again, not pretty viewing. That 30-20 loss to the Titans, though, again, you saw a lot more tenacity out of the Bulldogs. I mean, the Titans weren't at their best. Both teams played relatively well. I mean, the Bulldogs completed at a lower rate, only about a 77% completion rate to the Titans' 85%. But when the Bulldogs did have the ball, they made the most of it. It was just that the Titans' forward pack in the end took a hold of that game and really, really made the Bulldogs have to work to be in that game. The likes of Faso Malawi getting over the try line, Jared Wallace getting a rare try as well, AJ Brimson bagging 2 tries, one early on, one late. But the Bulldogs in the end couldn't stand up to it, and they were there or thereabouts for that game. But eventually, the Titans running away with it.
Yeah, I think this was the game that Luke Thompson. It was either this one or the Dragons 28-6 game where he scores one and sets one up. I think it's this one. I know he scores in that 30-20
yes.
Titans game.
Yeah.
But it's you're now thinking, okay, you now have a potential 80-minute prop. Yeah, a la Paul Gallen in Origin, a la Corey Parker in Origin, who can run hard, hit hard, is strong all round. Adam Elliott had just come back. Josh Jackson, yes, he was injured at the time, but he's going to be coming back. Like that's pretty strong right there. Jake Averillo again, hands all over the ball. You saw the emergence of Aaron Schott, who could be a very bright spark for the Bulldogs next year outside of Matt Burton. Matt Dury biding his time, got his opportunity, took it well. Yeah, you're starting to see some of these young Bulldogs come through, but for every step forward, they took 3 steps back. It's hard, 30-4 against a Panthers side. Sure, we'll give them that Panthers, and end up being in the grand final. No worries. They get that 28-6 win against the Dragons, but again, Jake Averillo, 2 tries, 2 try assists. Jeremy Marshall King, Adam Elliott barges over, but it's all Averillo. And you have to think at this point now that they start to build around Averillo while he plays. But then 36-10 against Parramatta, a Parramatta side that was without Reid Marnie. Dylan Brown was out of form. Gutherson was more or less on 1.5 legs at that point. Sean Russell makes his debut. And then, 66-0 for round 16. At that point, that's just rolling over. Like Jason Saab, hat-trick. Tom Trbojevic, hat-trick. Ruben Garrick, 2. Carl Lawton, 1. Toffa Sipley, 1. It was brutal. I was at that game. It was just so painful to watch. And for the strides forward that team had made, to then see them roll over as quickly as they did, and they had, I can't say a full strength side, but Beyond Diodo, who came in at the back end of last year, played really well. You had Jackson Tapine, who had played well. Josh Jackson was back from injury. Luke Thompson was there at prop. You had Averillo. You have Corey Allen, who was in there for his first game of the year. They're paying him $800,000. He was in New South Wales Cup for the first half of the year. Like, that's not meant to be a bad team on paper. And they rolled over like a roll up, like a fruit roll up in a kindergarten's lunchbox. It was really, really bad.
It was, but it looked like it begun the turning point as you get into round 16 there, as you mentioned. Then
Oh, hello. It's frozen again. Young Matty, you have frozen.
24 loss to the Sharks and then a 34-6 loss to the Titans. I mean, at this point, me and you were sat doing the previews, we're talking pre-game, and we're saying that the Bulldogs don't have a chance. If they're getting hit for 66 against, yes, what is the quickly becoming one of the Premiership contenders under the sturdy hand of Turbo Tom and Jason Saab and Ruben Garrick all lighting up the back line there, all of a sudden now that narrative changes when you get to round 19 and you're seeing a Sharks side that have been very rocks and diamonds, a Sharks side that were very makeshift with news that Chad Townsend was going to be departing soon, that Sean Johnson was potentially not going to be signing a new contract. There was a lot going on. Moylan was in and out of the halves. Will Kennedy was your only real consistent player at the Sharks at that point, and they were still putting the Dogs 44-24 down. And then over to the Titans, who arguably had a lot more to play for in wanting to keep finals hopes alive at that point, and the Dogs were just not standing up to it, and it was a real shame to see those glimmers of hope from those 22-16 losses and the 32-24 loss to the Rabbitohs to suddenly dissipate as fast as they did and fall apart as fast as they did. And there was no real catalyst to it. You couldn't say that they were really missing anyone that they'd used through the course of the season. It wasn't as if players had been missing through representative duties or anything like that. It was just that the Bulldogs had completely given up on the 2021 season, and there was probably a lot of players that had in mind where they'd be playing in the 2021 season, because at this point now, Matt Duffy's been dropped a lot by the Dragons, and he's been told that he's going to be moving across to the Bulldogs. Brent Naden's a done deal. Josh Addo-Carr's a done deal. There's a lot going on that Bulldogs players have got their eye on and having to think about during the course of the season that, quite frankly, that they didn't want to be a part of anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to think it was about this time that 14 of them were told, you know what, next year start looking. Yeah, I think 11 of those 14 were off contract at the end of this year. Another 3 had contracts through to the end of 22, but were told if you can find somewhere, you're more than welcome. And yeah, I mean, look, this was a Roosters side that had no Tedesco, no Brett Morris, Billy Smith, who was off a game and a half, realistically. Drew Hutchison, I think, had just come back from a punctured lung.
Yep.
Or it might have been just before that. Sam Verrills has had 80 minutes of football. Yeah, you have a bench that includes Ben Thomas, who was outside the top 30 at the start of the year. Like, that's how short this Roosters side was. So, there were sparks of hope.
Let's not forget as well that during that 32-24 loss, Lachlan Lewis became probably the only player I've ever seen become sin-binned at half-time with a judo hip toss on Cody Walker in a bit of an exchange. And that 10 minutes there, for how they were playing, you could very much argue the case of, in that 10-minute spell there, that the Bulldogs lost that game. I mean, it's not an outlandish claim at all when a game finishes with an 8-point differential. And I get that the Rabbitohs crossed once in the time that Lachlan Lewis was off the pitch, but they lost all momentum. Halftime came at a bad time for them. I mean, at halftime, it was 12. The Bulldogs were leading 12-10. In that second half, they played without a half for 10 minutes, and things started to come off. And then by that time, Lewis's head has gone. Everyone's losing their mind, and the Bulldogs slowly fade away. And the Rabbitohs, Johnston, Host, Murray, and Mark Nichols all get over the line in the second half, and the Bulldogs just don't have a response to it.
No, They didn't. It's one of the most boneheaded things you've seen on a football field for as long as I can remember. They'd scored 2 tries in 5 minutes prior to half time with Shoop and Corey Allen. But as you mentioned, Lucky Lewis gets sin binned at half time, trying to make the Australian Olympic team. Very nearly does, mind you. And in the 10 minutes that he was off, the Rabbitohs scored, guess what? 8 points. A converted try and a penalty goal. It was mistakes like that cost the Dogs more so than their ineptitude at times. And of course, you look at the Sharks game where they were down, what was it, 30-6 at halftime. They bring it back 2 tries after, straight after the half. Averillo hits back after Toby Rudolph goes over. They at least made a game of it, but again, it's the ineptitude and the dumb decisions of some of these players. Luke Thompson sin binned in the 24th minute. In the next 16 minutes going into half time, the Sharks score, trying to do some math here, 16 points. 3 tries, 2 conversions, 18 points, sorry, because they kicked the penalty goal as well. They lost by 20. It's those sorts of plays that the Dogs can't afford to have this year. And as you mentioned, there are players now that are looking potentially for the next payday. There are players who know the likes of Jake Averillo, Jeremy Marshall-King, Bailey Biondioto. Matt Burton signed. He's there next year. He's not going back on his word. He's taken someone's spot. Flanagan's already been told you're probably not in the plans for 22. Yeah. That's a lot of pressure. Corey Allen went to the Bulldogs thinking, I'm going to be a fullback. They moved Viteni Zelezniak at about this time.
Yep.
But Corey Allen's not going to be fullback next year because you got Matt Duffy coming in on a low-risk, high-reward 1-year deal. So he's trying to think, can I stay in this side? Jaden Ockenbaugh is thinking, if I can't stop making these errors, am I going to stay in this side? There's a lot of... And of course, we've forgotten about Josh Adokar. The Flying Fox, fastest man in the NRL, is coming to a Bulldogs side that's going to have Matt Burton, Matt Duffy, like 2 very electric players, Jake Averillo potentially in the centres with Aaron Shop. Like, this is a very well brought together 22 side. And these are players that are not playing at all like an NRL quality side. And it kind of, it reflects really until the last round of the competition.
Yeah, we'll get into them. The 28-16 loss to the Tigers, a 24-10 loss to the Warriors, 22-16 loss to the Knights, 36-18 loss to the Sea Eagles, and then a 38-0 win over the West Tigers. The West Tigers result, you can't really argue. It was just a poor performance. The Warriors, they were still there or thereabouts for getting that sacred 8th spot. The Knights, again, there or thereabouts. The Sea Eagles had only lost something like one of their last 20 games. And, and then they do finally get their revenge against the Tigers with that big win to end the season and give them some sort of hope and chance of actually seeing any salvation for the 2022 season beyond the high amount of signings that they got in. But the Tigers in that 28-16 win were arguably lucky to come away with a win in that one. Their completion rate was low, down at 73%. The Dogs down was up 79%. Within that 5 minutes of possession, they did manage to register a few tries. They did manage to get players on the score sheet. Luciano Leilua, Kemba Marlowe grabbing yet another double for the Tigers after his mid-season switch to the Tigers, and Tommy Talau grabbing a try as well, and then the 2 penalty goals from Adam Dewey really sending the Tigers home there. And again, any hopes of a comeback stifled. 75th minute, Jack Everington gets himself sin-binned. It's the same story repeating for the Dogs.
Yeah, rinse and repeat. Silly errors, lack of pressure, poor defensive reads. You could have copied and pasted that out of the majority of the games that the Dogs played this year, and it was frustrating to watch. You'd see them get themselves into games and like, okay, maybe there's a shot here, and then a silly error, a poor decision. It just didn't quite click. And I mean that last game of the year, no one gave a hoot. Like we were joking around during our round 20, round 25 preview, and just saying, we don't want to watch this game. Who cares? I think I said, you know what, Dogs 13 plus, because why the hell not? It's been that sort of year, and they freaking go and hit the Tigers out of the park 38-0. But like the thing that I think the Dogs fans can take out of that last game is that the Dogs just played carefree football. And when you had the likes of Jake Averillo, who is a running half, when you have the likes of Nick Meaney, whose talent was just wasted at the Bulldogs, and I'm glad that he's going to Melbourne, because I really hope that he'll step straight into the shoes of Josh Adokar and just flourish. When you have that sort of talent, when you have a tall, or 2 tall wingers really, in Corey Allen and Jaden Ockenball with pretty good hands, like you've got to be able to find a way to capitalize on that. And so often this year, they just weren't able to do that. But they just played carefree football, and you'd have to think that that's sort of what they're going to go into 2022. Think that I'm going to liken them to the Parramatta Eels. They play better when the structure's not there. Yes, they have their structured plays and their set plays, and they know what they want to do, but there's a plan B, a plan C, and a plan D. And plan B, C, D through to Z is do something with it. Just find a way, offload the ball, get it into the playmakers' hands, let them figure it out. Next year, they're going to have Matt Duffy, who has a beautiful right side cutout ball. Josh Adokar is going to be living that. He's going to be loving it. You've got Jake Averillo, who I really hope starts next season, who just has an insane burst of speed, a great step. Yeah, he's going to flourish. You got Matt Burton, who is going to come in, and he's going to have a lot of responsibility for a young player, but he broke out this year playing in a position that is not his. I think he can take a lot out of that and transform that into the Bulldogs. And you've got the likes still of Josh Jackson, of Luke Thompson, who will lead that forward pack. They've got some good young forwards coming through. And let's be real, they got a little bit of dead weight off their books as well. They've got a lot of talent coming in that if they play like how they did against the West Tigers in the last round of last year, I'm not going to say top 8, but you're going to see a stark improvement, and they'll at least be there or thereabout more often than not.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, in that final run out, Nick Meaney adds to his try total for the year, ends up finishing the season as top try scorer with 6 tries, which is a real bleak outlook of a season for this Bulldogs side. So, I mean, two of his 6 tries coming in that final game against the Tigers. Ockenbaugh gets on the score sheet, as does Jack Everington. Averillo grabs a double, and Corey Allen grabs one as well. I mean, the Tigers just never showed up for that game. It took 9 minutes for the Bulldogs to hit the front for Meaney, Averillo scores 2 minutes later. The game hits a bit of a lull. Nothing really happens for about another 20-odd minutes, and then all of a sudden the Tigers fall apart even further. Meany goes over. Straight after half-time, Hetherington goes over. Ockenborough. I mean, it was just 10-minute intervals at the time that the Bulldogs had just break the Tigers down, and the Tigers were looking for the exit as well. They weren't bothered. They weren't even getting their coveted 9th spot, so they'd given up completely. So, I mean, for the Bulldogs, it is one to look forward to for 2022 with the big signings that they've got coming in. But as for the 2021 season, abysmal, really poor season, and they know that they could and should have done better. But I mean, it's all to look forward to into 2022 now. I think that'll probably do us there. I mean, we've picked apart that season as best we could without being too defamatory. Because Lord knows Bulldogs fans absolutely love us. But we've gone through it to the best of our ability, and we'll be back next week to go through the next side up on the ladder as we go through the Brisbane Broncos 2021 season and pick that apart in similar fashion. All that's left to do now is thank you for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed. Let us know if you have, and we will see you next time.